afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our weekly Dial Global virtual workshop. Today, we have the phenomenal Geoff McDonald. I'm sure many of you know him already. He's a frequent speaker and good friend of Dial Global, as he's also on our advisory board as well. By way of welcome, Geoff is the co-founder of Minds at Work. He speaks out prolifically around mental health, the key actionable points that organizations can take when looking to embed this within their strategy, and also shares his phenomenal story personally. Geoff was formerly the Global Vice President HR for Marketing, Communications, Sustainability and Talent at Unilever. And he wears a number of different hats as well, sits on many boards as trustee and does a lot of work with charities and other organizations as well. Welcome, Geoff.
Hi, Leila. Can you hear me? All good? I'm not on mute, because we live in a world now when people tell you, oh, you're on mute. You're on mute. I never used to be told I'm on mute all the time, but ever since lockdown, you get told you're on mute.
Fortunately, you're not on mute. We can hear you loud and clear, which is fantastic. And it's great to have you here again today. We love having you, whether it be on podcasts, whether it be speaking engagements, and obviously today, really great to be talking about something which is so incredibly current, more now than ever before.
Yes, I know, and it's wonderful to be able to support you and to support all the work that Dial Global is doing around the whole issue of diversity and inclusion. And hello to all the participants. I don't think we can see, or can we see the participants?
I can see them, but you can't, Geoff. So they can ask questions. Apologies, but don't worry. And so I will say to everyone, a very, very warm welcome. We'd love this to be an interactive session. If it's the first time that you've joined us, now we've got a number of people here today from Aviva. Hello, all, and hope that you are well. I know a number are catching up on demand as well, so you could be watching this on the on-demand catch-up afterwards. But we've got a number of questions that people have emailed in already and sent across on the various social platforms to Geoff. So if you've got any questions, or if there's anything at all that you want to ask, make sure you put all of the questions into the live chat, and I'll keep an eye on those, so Geoff doesn't need to worry at all about that, and I will ask those at relevant points throughout the presentation and the discussion that Geoff's going to give, because I know he will hopefully very kindly share his personal story whilst we kick off before we get into the nuts and bolts of things. But if you would like to ask questions, please do make sure you put those into the chat, and I will be keeping an eye on that, so don't worry. If you do want to anonymize your questions as well, because we do sometimes have individuals who are new into the world of diversity and inclusion, or new into the world of speaking openly around mental health issues. So if you do want to anonymize, do feel free to. We're completely in a safe place here, non-judgmental, so do not worry at all. You're in safe, capable hands with Geoff and myself.
Great, thanks, Leila. Okay, so I mean, I suppose in many ways, this is quite a time for the whole diversity and inclusion subject or topic. I mean, in many ways, you might say that your time has arrived in the area of diversity and inclusion, because we know that, there are significant issues around, and we've always had them, around gender and more females in senior positions in organizations. During this tragic period that we've been through for many, many people, we've also seen the rise of the whole Black Lives Matter debate and issue. And so for the whole BAME community and for organizations and the representation of people from those backgrounds has become a significant issue. And I think the other thing that I always say is, if we talk about diversity and inclusion, I wonder how inclusive an organization is if people are still unable to talk about their mental ill health when they're at work. And so for me, it is a critical component of this debate and this issue. I remember when I was in Unilever, and I go into lots of organizations all over the world now, and you often hear the comment, well, You know, we want you to bring your whole self to work. Well, until you do. And we still have workplaces all over the world where billions and billions of people, billions, are suffering in silence every single day, not able to put their hands up and ask for some help if they are suffering from a common form of mental ill health or are struggling emotionally. And so you know, many organizations today keep people physically safe at work. They're concerned about the physical safety of people. But what about the emotional and mental safety of people? What about being able to have those conversations so that I truly can bring my whole self to work and it feels like a truly, truly inclusive culture in the organization? And if, you know, there's some data that is now becoming available to all of us around the tsunami that is about to hit us in terms of mental ill health. And I think it's going to be so important for organizations to be prepared for this tsunami, to be prepared for and create a culture and a way of working where people who are going to be coming back into the workplace, who are going to be coming out of lockdown, are going to feel that they can have the conversations that they need to have in their families, amongst their friends, and at work. And if you think about some of the factors that are driving this tsunami, you know, just think about, you know, all those frontline workers, particularly people in social care, NHS, who've been on the front line, who've experienced trauma like you can't believe. You know, think of, in this country, in the UK, over 40,000 people have died of coronavirus. Think of all those families that are still bereaving the loss of people. You know, think of individuals who've been locked down in an abusive relationship and what that has done to their mental and emotional health. You know, think of parents who've been anxious about their children and the education of their children. Also anxious about their children's mental and emotional health. Think of people who are still petrified of the virus and are now being asked to come back to work. Think of people who have enjoyed working from home, who are quite introverted and don't want to be coming back into the workplace. I mean, these are all the factors that are contributing to a tsunami that is going to hit us. And I think it's so, so important that we create a culture, we create an environment in workplaces where people feel they can come back and they can have these conversations if they have to. And I'm so passionate, you know, I think it was Mark Twain who once said, the two most important days in your life, what are they? And when I ask that question, people often say to me, it's the day I was born and then it's the day I die. And I kind of say, what? You can't wait for the second most important day in your life, which is the day you die? What is it about? What is it about life? What is it about being a human being that we can't wait for the second most important day in our life, which is the day I die? And Mark Twain, he said the two most important days in our life is the day we were born and the day we find out why we were born, which is that sense of purpose, that sense of meaning. And, you know, I'm very clear on that sense of purpose, and that is to try and create workplaces all over the world. And when I talk about a workplace, you know, yes, Aviva is a workplace. Yes, Unilever is a workplace, but so is a kindergarten a workplace. So is a fire brigade a workplace. So is the army a workplace, the NHS. So is the university a workplace. And I'm trying to create workplaces all over the world where people in those workplaces feel that they genuinely have the choice to just put their hand up and ask for some help if they are suffering from a common form of mental ill health. You know, we should have workplaces everywhere in the world where people feel that they can put their hand up and ask for some help. And that's not a very noble purpose of mine because, you know, in most workplaces all over the world, people feel that they can put their hand up and ask for help if they are suffering from a common physical illness. If they've got the flu, if they've got diarrhea, if they may be getting glandular fever. I mean, some common physical illnesses. People know they can put their hand up and ask for some help. But when it comes to our emotional health, when it comes to our mental health, and we're not feeling great, we still have workplaces all over the world where people feel that they can't talk. And that can't be right. It can't be right in the 21st century. You know, in a century where we've put men and women on the moon, we've brought them back safely. We talk about artificial intelligence. We have a knowledge economy where part of the competitive edge in organizations is the mental health of people, their cognitive abilities, their abilities to think clearly, to analyze data, to make good decisions. Yet all of us are mental and all of us are physical. All of us. I'm as mental as Layla is mental. And she won't say to me, oh, I'm not physical. Of course she's physical. And of course I'm physical. And so why is this like it is? It doesn't seem right. And you might say, Geoff, why are you so passionate about trying to create that sort of workplace? And the reason is I've got a bit of a story, and I'll just share a little bit of that today because I do want us to have a bit of time to ask some questions and to just have a conversation around this whole issue of creating a more inclusive culture with a particular reference to mental and emotional ill health. And so back in 2008, I'll never forget the date. It was the 25th of Jan, 2008. My daughter was going to turn 13 on the 26th of January, 2008. And so you can imagine how much excitement there is in our household on the evening of the 25th. Everybody is so excited because guess what? Jennifer is going to become a teenager the next day. She's more excited than I am. I remember talking to her that afternoon and she says to me, Dad, you know, as of tomorrow, you talk to me differently. And I remember saying, what do you mean I talk to you differently, Jennifer? She says, yes, you do, Dad, because I won't be your little girl tomorrow. I'm going to be a teenager. And I'm sure there's nobody on this call who can't resonate with that feeling. Remember the day before, it's a bit like the night before Christmas, the day before you becoming a teenager. So excited. And at midnight on the 25th, I get woken up with a massive panic attack. Now, I've never had a panic attack in my life. It's never been part of my vocabulary. I've never spoken to anybody about a panic attack back in 2008. And because I'm so naive about what's going on, my heart's beating, I'm sweating profusely, my fingers are tingling, the tips of my toes are tingling, my breathing is really erratic and struggling. I think I'm about to have a heart attack. And so I bump my wife and I say to Debbie, Deb, I think I'm going to have a heart attack. And she says, why? And I try and explain. So she says, get up, walk around the room, take some deep breaths. And so I do that. And every time I tell the story, I can feel some of the anxiety. I can still feel it. But I take these deep breaths, which I'm going to do now. And as I take that deep breath, slow, the levels of anxiety begin to subside. I kind of get myself back into bed, but I can't go back to sleep. And I can't go back to sleep because of three things. One, my adrenaline is pumping through my body, so I can't go back to sleep. Secondly, I'm so petrified that if I fall back to sleep, this thing will happen again. And I don't wish it on my worst enemy, a panic attack. And the third is that I build a capability. I don't know where it came from, but I had this capability of being able to catastrophize over the most insignificant issues in my life. Catastrophize. I remember waking up at about 3 a.m, going into the bathroom, had a sore on the inside of my mouth. I open my mouth, I look in the mirror, I interrogate the sore, I get back into bed, and I convince myself that I've got the beginnings of throat and mouth cancer. And I lie there and catastrophize about the fact that I've now got cancer. The next morning, Jennifer comes running into the bedroom. She's so excited. She wants to open her presents. And all I can say to her, her younger sister, and to Debbie, my wife, is please, please go away. I can't engage in anything that is joyful, that is enthusiastic, where there's happiness, where there's fun, where there's celebration. And I just want to take the duvet, pull it over my head, and I just can't get myself out of bed. They go off to school. Debbie comes home at about 10 o'clock. Where am I? Still in bed. She says, what's going on, Geoff? Why can't you get up? I said, I feel so anxious. I'm paralyzed. I just can't get myself out of bed. She said, this is not like you. Why don't you go and see a doctor? I thought, well, what? Go and see a doctor? Why? I've got no aches. I've got no pains. I've got no temperature. I'm not feeling nauseous. I've got no flu-like symptoms. Why must I go and see a doctor? There's nothing wrong with me. I don't feel sick. She said, Geoff, please just go and see somebody. Anyway, midday, I'm in the doctor's rooms. Cut a long story short, he diagnoses me with anxiety-fueled depression. Now, I can tell you, up until that point, do you know what my understanding of the word depression is? I'm an Arsenal supporter. Okay, so some of those of you who might be Arsenal supporters, guess what? We know what it's like. I would sort of wait 2/3 into the season. I think we're going to win the league. And then guess what? The last third of the season, every season, the wheels just fall off. Turn to my wife and say, I'm so depressed about this Arsenal football team. Or I'd wake up on a Saturday morning, it's pouring with rain. I want to go for a mountain bike ride. and it's raining. And so I turned to my wife and said, Deb, I'm feeling depressed. Why? Because it's raining outside. I remember when I first came to this country, people used to talk to me about a thing called SAD, seasonal effects disorder. I'd been here for about 2 years, and around January time, people used to talk to me about SAD. And I used to think, SAD, what's that? And they'd say, no, it's seasonal effects disorder. I say, okay, explain, what's that? No, the weather, it influences your mood in this country. And I think to myself, what a load of crap. The weather influence your mood? Why don't you just man up, you snowflake, as Piers Morgan would probably say. And here I am on the 26th of Jan, 2008, diagnosed with anxiety-fueled depression. As I walk out the doctor's rooms, I make a decision that saves my life. And the decision I make is that I refuse to be burdened by the stigma associated with the illness. In many ways, I'm liberated to make that decision because I get a diagnosis from the doctor. I get a diagnosis. And I feel liberated to be able to make that decision, that I won't be burdened by the stigma. And so I tell my children, tell my wife, I tell my close friends, I tell my employer. By the way, I'm very, very lucky because at that time, I'm working for Unilever, a company that cares. I was so lucky I worked for a boss who had a compassionate and understanding relationship to mental ill health, and so he didn't write me off. I had other colleagues who understood this, so I was not written off. And I had the most wonderful friends around me. And the reason that saved my life is that in my darkest moments, the only thing that kept me alive during my darkest moments of recovery, and it took me 3 months to recover, the only thing that kept me going was knowing how much I was loved. The emotion, love. How many songs have been sung about the power of love? And, you know, just knowing that I was loved by those people, that my daughters loved me. Nights when I thought life is not worth living anymore. I'm a burden on everybody. Why don't I just end it? Knowing that I had a 10-year-old, a 13-year-old, a boss who actually loved me. I could feel the love. That emotion kept me alive. And through a combination of activities, love, a sense of hope that I got from a friend who'd been ill, and I saw he was better. He gave me so much hope I could get better. Yes, medication. Yes, cognitive behavioral therapy. Yes, slowly getting back onto my bicycle and into the swimming pool. But a combination of those activities over a period of 3 months, I get myself better. I go back into Unilever. 2010, I have a bit of a relapse, nothing as bad as 2008. And then in 2012, I'm walking home one evening on Blackfriars Bridge, leaving Unilever House in Victoria Embankment, and my phone goes, and it's my wife on the end of the phone, and Debbie says, Geoff, you've got to get home. I said, why have I got to get home? I said, I'm on my way. I'm walking to Waterloo Station. She said, please, you've got to get home. I've got terrible news. I said, tell me, what is it? Are the girls okay? She said, yes, the girls are fine, but one of your closest friends died by suicide this afternoon. I mean, when I heard that from Debbie, I couldn't believe it. I mean, we'd been with him a couple of weeks before. And here was a guy, I think it was Carl Jung, who said, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. The brighter the light, think about it, the darker the shadow. Robin Williams, Ruby Wax, Winston Churchill, Vici, Stephen Fry. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow. And here my friend was gone. He was the most wonderful, compassionate human being. He brought so much energy to everybody he met. He was the light and life of a party. And now he was gone. And I got home that night and I lay in bed and I thought to myself, what is the difference? We're now 2012. I'm flourishing. I'm learning how to recover every single day as somebody who's susceptible to anxiety-fueled depression. And my friend is gone. What's the difference? And the very simple conclusion I came to was that I was able to have one conversation, which literally saved my life. It sent me on a direction that helped me to get the support, feel the love, a sense of hope. And he couldn't talk to anybody. He was an alpha male, Afrikaner, South African. Think about the South African rugby team if you can't picture an Afrikaner, macho, alpha male South African. There's just no ways he could have the conversation, not even with his wife. And instead, he died by suicide. And I lay there and I thought, stigma has just killed my friend. And that can't be right. It can't be right. Stigma in the 21st century. I got the badge, I got the t-shirt. Why didn't he talk to me? And I lay there and I thought, I have to do something about this. I have to. And so that night, I wrote to Alistair Campbell, who at the time was doing a lot of advocacy and campaigning work. I went onto his website, I found his email address, and I just wrote to him completely out of the blue. I didn't know him from a bar of soap, except we all knew, and a lot of us know of him. Within 10 minutes, I get a response from him. A week later, we meet up in Belsize Park. And ever since that day, I take tiny, tiny footsteps on a path filled with a deep sense of purpose. And that is to create workplaces all over the world where people in those workplaces feel they genuinely have the choice to put their hand up and ask for some help. And for those of you on this session today and who are going to watch this and who are leaders, I really challenge you to think about, what are you doing as a leader? What are you doing as a leader to create an environment, to create a workplace where people feel they genuinely can come and have a conversation with you and know that they will get the love, the compassion, and the support such that they can get themselves better, recover, and probably come back an even better human being, a far better employee, somebody who's working for you. And that's my challenge to you. What are we doing to create those kind of workplaces? And, I'm not saying for 1 minute this afternoon, I'm not saying for 1 minute that had my friend been able to have that conversation, he would definitely be alive today. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that, I don't know if you can see this, but a tiny, tiny, tiny grain of sand. Think how thin a tiny grain of sand is. You know what? Imagine there's that tiny, tiny, thin grain of sand chance that he'd still be alive had he been able to have one conversation. Just tiny. And you know what? That is worth fighting for every single day of my life. It's worth fighting for every day of my life. That people can just have that one conversation that just might save their lives. And so that's why I'm so passionate about trying to create these sort of workplaces, Layla. That's why I'm so passionate about us, thinking, when we think about diversity and inclusion, that we also think about, how inclusive is our workplace, where people feel that they can genuinely talk about some of this stuff. And what I want to do now, but maybe you might have one or two questions you want to ask me before I go on to that. But what I want to do is I just want to share with the group just a few thoughts on, as I've journeyed this path, after meeting with Alistair, he introduced me to some amazing people. I began to journey this path. I did some work in Unilever, co-led a piece of work where we broke stigma, and then I left Unilever in 2014. And ever since 2014, I've been so lucky. Purpose takes you to people and places you could never imagine. I've been into sectors, I've been into countries, I've been all over the place trying to create these kind of workplaces. And I've learned a few things about what are some of the better companies, what are some of the better workplaces doing, what are some of the better family groups, men's group doing to create a culture where people feel that they can talk about that. And I want to share some of those insights and some of those learnings with you. But before I go there, maybe Layla might have a question, or there might be something that's come up on chat.
Thanks so much, Geoff. And as ever, your story is phenomenal. And I think the power of storytelling is often underestimated. It is, as you say, it's often that little piece, that little story that is shared that actually is the fuel to push the snowball down the hill, and you find that others then start sharing and talking amongst each other, because it is still very much a taboo subject. And certainly suicide, in addition, as you mentioned, I know a little bit about some of the mental health issues surrounding suicide, which is never a nice thing to talk about. But as you know, one of my family members committed suicide, and I worked for the Samaritans for 3 years. You hear the most incredible stories with people who are in wonderful situations many times, but just can't speak out about these issues because they don't feel safe and they don't feel comfortable. And so I take my hat off to you, as I always do, first and foremost, for sharing your story with everyone here today. And we've had a real nice steady stream of questions, which I think is a very nice segue into the presentation that I know you're going to be doing for us today, around health being a strategic priority within business, which, if organizations are not looking at this, and I know you'll be talking about this, Geoff, why and why not, and what can we do to support this very important invisible diversity, because it is a hidden diversity that often bubbles away unnoticed until it is too late. Now, we've had a number of people commenting saying thank you very much, incredibly inspirational, Geoff, for you sharing what you have today. Dan says, great to be here. These conversations are some of the most important yet exciting conversations we can be having in the times we're living in. Very exciting due to what comes on the other side, knowing we're all on this journey together. Thank you for that, Dan. Gareth says, if an employee is dealing with mental health issues, when is the time to address that with an employer? Is it immediately, or is it when your employer inquires about your health? And also, does Geoff believe that you should disclose mental health issues on the day you start a new job? Very good question.
Absolutely not. Depending upon the culture of that organization, you know, I mean, I would not be disclosing the fact that I had had a mental ill health issue on my first day or as part of the application process, unless I knew that that was an organization that had a compassionate, it had an understanding relationship to mental ill health. You know, I mean, you know, and it's such a good question, because I mean, I would hope in time that we would be able to declare this sort of stuff. And let me tell you why I think that is what I'd like to see one day. I was being interviewed by CNBC a year or so ago. And at the end of the interview, one of the journalists said to me, they said, Geoff, why, if you're an HR professional, you recruit people. Yes, I do. And you had this really senior job, and you had two individuals, the last two, you'd been through the interviews, you'd had a final look at both of them, you had some conversations, and you discovered that one of them had suffered from a mental ill health challenge in the past. Why would you ever recruit that person versus the person who has not suffered? And I said to this journalist, let me tell you why I would recruit the person who had suffered. This is why I would recruit that person. A senior person coming into the organization who's going to lead. This is why I'd recruit that person. Firstly, that person is probably a better listener. Secondly, that person is probably very compassionate as a result of what they've been through. That person is probably very in tune with all of the symptoms. He or she understands this issue, and therefore will be open to people talking to them about their own struggles. Do you know that that person has probably overcome a significant challenge in their life? Significant. Do you know that that person who struggled in the past, I think that they are probably a better human being as a result of what they've been through. You know, people say to me, what was my breakdown like? I say it was terrible, but it was my breakthrough in life. I honestly believe that I've become a better human being. And you know what, Layla? I'd love to see truly human beings leading organizations today, leading nation states, than some of the narcissistic bullies that I see in those positions today. Bring it on, the person who might have suffered in the past. A better human being. Now, because we've still got so much stigma, unfortunately, I wouldn't declare it up front. And I would, you know, and if I'm in an organization where I feel there's lots and lots of stigma, then I would go and talk to a close friend, or I'd go and see a doctor, and that's the way in which I would begin to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for answering that, Geoff. We've had a number of other questions, and I've had a number of emails with questions for people who are watching on demand. But what I will do, because I know that I'm conscious of time, and I know that you've got some real great pieces of kind of case study on some of the slides that you wanted to talk through. So my thinking is that some of the questions may be naturally answered, and then we can go into a question and answer as we're perhaps going through some of these key pieces, because a number of the questions, some of them were HR focused, some of them are personal issues, and I am thinking actually it would be brilliant to look at some of the examples for things that have worked well, in particular some of the employee resource groups, and how to position this as a strategic priority within the organization. And let's look at the benefits as well that
Cool.
can really bring to the forefront.
Okay, thanks, Layla. And thank you so much for those wonderful comments. You know, I often say that every story that we tell, it's like sending a lifeboat out into the ocean, and the billions of people that are suffering in silence, they cling onto the lifeboat and they realize two things. The first thing they realize is they're not alone. And the second thing they realize is they might just be normal. There's actually nothing wrong with them. Something has just happened to them. Now, when I talk about well-being, when I talk about health, when I talk about mental health, when I talk about emotional health, a lot of my thinking comes and is informed by the Warwick-Edinburgh definition of well-being, which is our physical health. And we all know the drivers of our physical health, like you can see on the slide: sleep, recovery, activity, nutrition. Our emotional health, which are our feelings. And apparently we have something like 330 feelings that we can feel, from contentment to sad, to disgust, to frustration. And then we have our mental health, which is our cognitive ability, our ability to remember something, our ability to focus on something, our ability to show attention to something, our ability to look at some data and analyze the data, our ability to make a good judgment and a good decision. That's our mental health. It's our cognitive ability. And it's a wonderful thing to have good mental health, to have clear thinking, good judgment, good decision making. And then we have right at the top of the triangle that sense of purpose and that sense of meaning. And you know, our health gives us our energy. And I would say that one of the biggest insights that I have picked up over the last couple of years is that the most important driver of individual, team, and organizational performance is the energy of people. So if there are any Liverpool supporters out there, well done. You bloody won the Premier League. You've done well in the Champions League. I don't know what's happened to you in the last 3 years. You win everything. Why? Because you parachuted this guy called Klopp into the club. And what did he do? He brought energy and he brought passion. And you know, energy is such an important driver of our performance at an individual level, at a team level, and at an organizational level. And we get our energy from our health. So if you all buy the fact that an energized team, an energized individual is going to perform really well, it's a key driver of performance in an organization. Then I ask the question, why is the health of your people, purpose, mental health, emotional health, and their physical health, why is the health of your people not a strategic priority? If it is such an important driver of performance, why is it not a strategic priority? Why is it discarded to a week called the Well-Being Week? And then we flog you to death for the other 51 weeks of the year, or a few bananas next to the till in the canteen, or a few training courses around mental health first aid, and ticked a few boxes. There's nothing strategic about that. But why is it not a strategic priority? It is a key driver of performance. And I bet all organizations, when they think about developing a strategy, they have some priorities, and every one of those priorities are all about driving and enabling the performance of an organization. And so why is health not there? And then people say to me, well, what's the business case for having health there? Well, I mean, I'm sure there are lots of business cases. Go to Harvard, you'll see the return on organizations that invest in enhancing the health of their people, 1 to 5 at least. COVID-19 has proved to us that if people aren't healthy, economies come to a grinding halt. We fall into recessions that we've never experienced before. And we all know that the energy, those energized people, those people who've got passion, they've got that capacity to get things done, those are your best performers. And we get our energy from being healthy. And so why is it not a strategic priority? And then people will say to me, well, but Geoff, what does that mean, making it a strategic priority? And I'm just going to share with you a few thoughts and ideas on what that might mean. So what it might mean is that there are two things that you have really, really begun to focus on. One is what I would call organizational accountability to keep people healthy. Organization accountability. You know, we have organizations out there that have accountability to keep people safe. We should also have organizations who have accountability to keep people healthy. Because guess what? Healthy people are more safe. Yet the only reason we invest billions in health and safety, and by the way, it all goes to safety, is because if somebody were to injure themselves in an unsafe workplace, might go to jail. But when it comes to health, it doesn't really matter. So I think we need to build a degree of organizational accountability. And what does that look like? It looks like organizations who are investing in resources that will improve the physical, the emotional, the mental, and give people a sense of purpose and meaning at work. That's what I mean by a degree of organizational accountability. You've also looked at your leadership development model and you've created a behavior. Maybe it's called compassion, We'll have a behavior called compassion, which is about showing compassion to our people, being interested in the health of our people, encouraging our people to use the resources that we as an organization are investing in to enhance people's health. And so why don't we introduce into our leadership development model, the behaviors we expect of our leaders, something that has got to do with encouraging and enhancing the health of our people. And the third area that you've got to look at from an organizational accountability point of view is ways of working. You can do an audit of the ways of working. Find out what are some of the ways of working that are causing stress, that are causing for people to be anxious, and how can you change some of those ways of working. And so a combination of ways of changing ways of working, introducing a leadership behavior, investing resources around this particular framework, all of those will drive a degree of organizational accountability and show people that you want to try and enhance the health of people. Now, you can't do any of that if we haven't also created a more inclusive workplace. We haven't addressed the stigma of mental ill health. And I think it's going to be so important to address that stigma fundamentally, where we create this inclusive culture. And I'll come back to that just now. And so what does it look like? So you've got leaders who are engaged in this. They are advocating for the health of their people, just like they're engaged in advocating for the safety of people. You've got leaders who are making decisions, financial and human resource decisions, to invest in the health of their people. You've got a leadership team that has changed its mindset around performance, and where performance equals knowledge, skill, behavior, experience, multiplied by energy. Because you know what? If energy is zero, P is zero. You can have all the knowledge, you can have all the skills, you can have all the behaviors, you can have all the experience. But if you're not healthy and you've got no energy, your performance is zero. And so why don't we introduce that into the performance management mindset in the organization? As a leadership group, we are going to advocate the importance of energy and health as a critical driver of performance in this organization. It's as important, if not more important, than giving people the right knowledge, the right skills, the right behaviors, and the right experience. We've done an audit of the ways of working so that we can see what some of the stresses are. We've changed our leadership, we've introduced a leadership behavior, which is around compassion and enhancing the health of people. We've invested, we've spent some money in investing in resources to enhance people's emotional, mental. We've thought about the purpose of the organization beyond growth and profitability. We are driving a degree of individual accountability to enhancing your health in the organization. It's going to be part of our development ethos, where as part of your development in this company, you know what we're going to be talking to you as part of your development? We're going to be talking to you about your health, your well-being. And because we've invested in all these resources to enhance your health, you know, these resources around physical, emotional, mental purpose, we want you to use those resources. And so we're going to have development plans around your health, where individuals take some accountability to use the resources to enhance their health so that they've got the energy to perform. And then finally, we've addressed the stigma. And the big lessons for me around addressing stigma, Layla, are number one, we've got to educate everybody around mental ill health. And I'm not saying everybody has to go on a 2-day or 1-day mental health first aid England course. Yes, there's a place for that. But a 90-minute program, a 2-hour program for every single person in the organization, build it into your induction program, build it in as part of your recruitment process, where you're educating people who are coming into the organization, but educate everybody around mental health, mental ill health. What is stress? What is anxiety? What is depression? What are the symptoms to look out for? How do you have a conversation with somebody? It's no point in just educating some people. We don't do it for safety. So why don't we do it for mental health? Because you know what? If you create a culture where people's levels of awareness and understanding are raised, they will be more compassionate to this particular subject. They will create a culture within their teams where people feel that they've got a boss who understands this, who's compassionate to it. And therefore we can have the conversation. And that one conversation, just one, might just save a life. And so education, education, education. And you take some of the money from safety and invest it in the education of people around their health. It's about priorities. And if it's a strategic priority, you will invest the resources in enhancing the health of your people. So education, important. The second is awareness building, campaigning, running campaigns, 2 or 3 campaigns during the course of the year. you know, raising the awareness, the understanding of mental health, deciding on the language you want to use. You might not want to use the word mental health. You might be wanting to encourage people to be mentally fit, and therefore it's about fitness, just like it is about physical fitness. And so campaigning and creating a more positive narrative around mental health and how good it is to be mentally healthy. So that, and we've got some resources, just like you use some dumbbells to make your muscles nice and strong, we've also got some resources to make you emotionally and mentally healthy. And we want you to use those. And so thinking about the language that you want to use and the campaign so that you begin to normalize mental health, mental ill health within your organization. Storytelling, the most powerful driver of breaking stigma, the most powerful driver. You know, it was my experience in Unilever. It's my experience all over the world. When senior people, when influential people, you know, it might be a shift manager on the line, but people who are of influence, who have got credibility within the organization, are sharing some of their stories. And not everybody's got a story like mine, which is their crucible moment in life. Not everybody has been through what I've been through, but we've all got a story. We've all got some association with mental ill health. You heard Layla. She's got a story. She's got a story around mental ill health. We've all got a story. And if we're going to tell a story of somebody else, please get their permission before you tell that story. Please get their permission, because we still live in a world of stigma. But if we can just share some of those stories, the more we share those stories, the more we normalize this conversation, the more we make it safe to be vulnerable, as a real and probably the most important lever in addressing the stigma of mental ill health. Now, if you're going to tell your story, please, you might want to get a bit of coaching beforehand, a bit of advice, a bit of guidance, but you also want some support for after you've told that story, because I can tell you, once you've told the story, you become a lightning rod. You become a lightning rod for others who are going to come and want to talk to you, are going to want to release some of their feelings on you, and you need to be prepared and able to deal with that. And so storytelling, hugely important. And then finally, let's make sure that we've got support. We've invested in support resources across the organization, because line managers are not therapists, they're not psychiatrists, but what they can do is they can show love, they can show compassion, and they can signpost people who put their hands up and say, I need some help. The line manager can signpost them to the resources that you have in place, whether that's an EAP program, a hotline to the Samaritans, your own internal web that you've created around mental health and support resources for people on that. And so these are just some of the factors. These are just some of the critical success factors to addressing the stigma of mental ill health. And I think once we've addressed the stigma, then we're able to begin to do some of this other stuff around checking on ways of working, changing the leadership behaviors, and starting to have these sorts of conversations within an organization. And we've begun to elevate the health of our people to a strategic priority. And why? Because it's the most important driver of individual, team, and organizational performance. Thank you, Layla.
Because first and foremost, we've had a number of questions emailed in and a number of questions on the chat, some football commentary as well, which I'll mention in just a second. But the fantastic things about these 4 pieces here, Geoff, that you've kindly showcased for us, is it's not rocket science, but there's
Absolutely,
a huge
Layla.
amount that goes into the depth and the nuts and bolts that make each of these pieces possible. Education, maybe we can come up with a couple of key examples here. We're working with a fantastic organization who does scalable pieces around real life simulation studies to have people working together interactively, understanding. And I know you do a number of key pieces as well around education, so it'd be good to know any examples perhaps on each of these key facets, because I'd love to touch perhaps on support resources through employee resource groups, because again, it is this tipping the snowball down the hill scenario, or you called it a lightning rod. You do suddenly become this all-seeing, all-knowing, someone that everyone wants to come to talk to tell more about their story, which is phenomenal. It'd be great to touch on perhaps some of the key pieces that organizations can implement. Yeah. So as you said, once they're ready and willing and coached and able after the education and making things feel safe, to then share their stories, that they're prepared then for what can often be, and I know you've seen this before in some of the organizations you've worked with globally, there's suddenly an influx of people sharing their stories, putting it on the platforms. So how can we set this up through examples within education? And then, perhaps let's talk a little bit about some potential resources there before I quickly go into some other questions that people have asked.
Yeah, Leila, I mean, you've said it all. I mean, there is no rocket science to what I've put up there on this slide. There's absolutely no rocket science. You know what it is? It's whether leaders, the executive team, the leadership team of the organization is willing to do this stuff. There's no rocket science here, all right? It's a question of whether people are willing to do this, are willing to begin to have the conversation around mental ill health in their organization. And I know sometimes that can feel a bit scary, right? That it's a subject that can feel a little bit scary. But if we begin with education, and there are, I mean, whether it's Mental Health First Aid England, whether it's Mind, whether it's Head Torch, I mean, there are a number of providers out there that will come into the organization and bespoke some training for you around, and the training that you might give to a line manager versus a non-line manager can be bestoked and made quite different. I think the line manager training, there's a lot of focus around how do you have the conversation? How do you spot the signs? How do you ensure that conversation is a safe conversation? But this isn't rocket science. We train people on safety, and we are prepared to invest a lot of money in training people on safety. Why? Because we worried that if somebody were to do something and they hadn't been trained, somebody might go to jail. Now, I don't want us to wait for somebody to die by suicide in an organization before we wake up to the fact that maybe we should have created a culture and an environment where people could just have one conversation that could save a life. So that's the education piece.
Absolutely. And I think you're completely right when you talk about people being willing. Yeah. Anyone who's willing, whose heart is in the right place, who is willing to put their head a little bit above the parapet, in particular, the executive leadership team, the CLT, as we sometimes call it, and those who are in positions, because what we see most successfully of all, and I know, Geoff, you've been instrumental in driving this with a number of organizations, is watching that disseminate down through what we often call the trickle effect. You have a senior executive within an organization, which is clearly back in your Unilever days, sharing that story, and what came out of that, I don't think you even nearly expected that you'd have so many people then starting to share their stories. But a lot of these examples I hear, and a lot of our members have said the same. Once you've got the exec buy-in, or you've got an executive sponsor, whether it be within a mental health employee resource group, or whether it be within another staff network group, they're sometimes called staff network groups, business resource groups, employee resource groups, critical to have one which really does focus on mental health and wellness, because the vast majority of the population, and now I'm preaching to the converted here with you, Geoff, but vast majority of the population have suffered with one form or another of mental health, depending, obviously on a different scales there. But if we can get that executive buy-in, and we can then give those leaders the confidence to ultimately share those stories, to then recruit and grow and disseminate out through the workforce, it gives the almost acceptance to others. And whether you like it or not, as a senior leader, people are looking to you for guidance. And if you're not talking about it, then how are they going to feel comfortable talking about it? And I think that's what you've done so well, Geoff, with some of these organisations you've worked with. And like you say, it's not rocket science. There's so many different programs that you can go on. We've had a number of questions over on email for you. Read the digital workspace. Obviously, we're doing this today digitally, but there's many scalable solutions and brilliant providers who do real in-depth pieces that allow people to actually chat across the globe via the wonder of digital working and actually share these experiences. utilize what is at hand, because there's plenty of stuff out there, and I know that you, Geoff, would be happy, as we would also, to look at recommendations depending on where an organization sits. And I think importantly, no one's wrong, but everyone is at a different phase of that journey, so don't worry. So, Geoff, on the awareness building and the storytelling, I wonder, there's been a couple of examples that you shared with me previously where you've been in, spoken to organizations, and they have then shared their own personal stories. The leaders have shared their stories, and you've seen employee resource groups grow and expand out because of that. I wonder whether you can talk us a little bit through that before we touch on some resources in these last questions here.
Yeah, look, as I said, Leila, I think, in terms of the storytelling, I mean, it's easy for me to encourage people to tell their stories. And, it has been, I think, as you said earlier, storytelling, in all my experience over the last 6 years on the road doing this work, storytelling is the most powerful driver of behavior change. It's the most powerful driver of behavior change. Yes, you can give me all the data. Yes, you can appeal to me intellectually. But when you tell stories resonate with people. And when something resonates with somebody, they want to do something about it. When it resonates, they want to do something about it, and they will go and do something about it. And so I think encouraging storytelling. We had I always tell the story of, and people say, yeah, but I haven't got a crucible moment. And I say, let me give you an example of a wonderful story that was told. When I was in Unilever, our chief scientist, he one day came in and he wrote to his 3,000 employees all over the world. He wrote a blog on what was it like to be the father of a daughter who suffers from general anxiety disorder. He wrote this blog on what's it like to be the father of a daughter who suffers from anxiety. Do you know that those 3,000 scientists around the world, they knew that they had a leader who had a compassionate and an understanding relationship to anxiety, to depression. And all it took was writing his story on a blog around what is it like to be that father of somebody who suffers. I've had instances where, individuals have come to me afterwards and they've started sort of whispering to me, and I've said to them, why are you whispering? And I'm saying, share, you've got a story there. It's a lifeboat that you can send out. And so helping those individuals to be able to tell that story, coaching them, guiding them, providing them with the support afterwards, I think is absolutely critical in this area of storytelling. But the more, and you know what, it doesn't always have to be, yes, I want the members of the executive team to be sharing some of their stories, but it's just people who are influential. Another example of a company, shift managers in a manufacturing site, a shift manager in a very alpha male macho manufacturing site sharing their story, that's probably more powerful than the CEO. Because those people on the factory side probably never ever see the CEO, but they can resonate with that shift manager. They can relate to the shift manager. And so I think your audience and the people that are talking have got to be people that will relate to that audience.
Great example there, Geoff. And I think in particular for guys, and not just for guys, I should say. And we heard this following on from one of our talks actually at L'Oreal that you did. One of the individuals there, he said that was absolutely phenomenal. He hadn't expected to feel the way that he did. Notice the word feel, which I thought was excellent. He said, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a leader, I'm a boss. And sometimes I feel I have to put a brave face on it all. And actually it encouraged him to then share the story. He took it back to the organization, and it was a manufacturing organization, a cheese manufacturing organization, actually, within the FMCG arena. And they had people from the factory floor on the lines come and open up because they didn't understand what it was and why they were not necessarily able to express these feelings. And I think men do have it sometimes, to a degree, often, not always, a little harder. because there is still, especially for some of the more seasoned leaders, perhaps, that archetype from the business book textbooks that say that you must be a certain way to be a leader or a CEO. Actually not the case. Human-led leadership is very much paving the way forward. Now I'm conscious of time, because we've literally got a couple of minutes, and we have a couple of other questions. Geoff, I sympathise with you being an Arsenal fan, as we Newcastle fans have probably suffered even more! Exclamation mark. Do you feel that there is one particular cause of mental health problems, for example, poor work-life balance, family problems, etc., or that the cause is normally a combination of these factors and others?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think, the research tells us there are some of us out there that are more susceptible to mental ill health than others. And why are some people more susceptible to others? And there are three reasons. For some of us, it's just in our genes. It's just in our genes. We just like that, right? It's just part of who we are. And, if I think of my mother, she was a very anxious person. So maybe I've got the gene. It's just part of who I am. The other driver is, as a child, if you experience trauma, particularly in the form of abuse, in adult life, it's likely to manifest itself in a mental ill health condition. And the third is, when you're an adult, it's about how much, and excuse my French, how much crap gets thrown at you at any one time. So imagine moving house, imagine getting divorced, imagine losing a child and your job all at the same time. Wow. All of that stuff, a combination of those factors, can trigger you into not being well, either emotionally or mentally. And so I think it is a combination of factors. But I think the most important thing, in answering that question, is this little framework. What have I learned as a result of my crucible moment in life? What I've learned is that you have to, if you want to have good mental health, you've got to look after yourself physically. You've got to look after yourself emotionally. Yes, you've got to look after yourself mentally. And yes, you've got to have a sense of purpose and meaning in your life. And so nutrition is an important driver of good mental health. But so are relationships and having good relationships, because the two biggest drivers of emotional health are relationships and financial security. And so being able to maintain good relationships, connect with people, connection is such an important driver of emotional health. I have a lovely little acronym, Layla, that I use to ensure that I attend to all of these aspects of my health. And it's called CAN-DO. The C stands for connect. Connect with nature, connect with people, connect with a sense of your own meaning. So connection, huge driver of emotional health. A is for active. Stay active. It's so important for your physical health. N is for try and be nice to somebody. Sense of purpose. See what that does to your feelings when you're nice to somebody, when you're giving. D is about discover. Good for your mental health, your cognitive ability, learning something new, listening to a podcast. And O is all about observation, recovery, meditation, mindfulness. And so in answering that question, yes, it's a combination of factors. But in order to maintain good mental health, you have to look after all aspects of your well-being. And you can't just focus on one without focusing also on the others.
Thanks so much, Geoff. And that's such a useful framework. And I hope we've covered the vast majority of questions. I think actually a number of them were answered in the last portion of this virtual workshop. We had a number around culture, openness for mental health and bringing this to work, a number of questions around that. So thank you all so much for your questions. And if we didn't answer them directly, I hope that we absolutely did in the last 15 minutes. Interesting that you mentioned there actually around financial well-being as well, Geoff. We did have a comment earlier saying, firstly, thank you, and a huge supporter of the healthy organization, and Geoff, great job. And also said that physical well-being, emotional well-being, if you add that to Corona, there's a lot of concern there about financial well-being. So great that you brought that up there as well. And just as a very, very last quick question, so I want to make sure that I don't miss out this question for Vijaya. I know that there's a number of communities which are more susceptible, as you mentioned, Geoff, to mental health, in particular, often the Black, Asian minority, ethnic employees within the workforce, and also sometimes women. And this question is particularly around women, and Vijaya is actually coming to us from India, Organisation India, which is wonderful, and she's talking about women being on a career break and maternity break, and often then basically being given the lowest preference in terms of hiring opportunities. And I think what she's trying to say is actually multi-skilled, and the perception that companies have in giving opportunities to women on a break is perhaps quite low. And I think in particular in the local environment certainly seems to be the way, in particular in India, but I think also in communities. I was speaking to a number of community leaders actually yesterday from the various different religious communities in and around the north and the south, and again heard some similar things. And whilst we know these individuals are then perhaps more susceptible to some of the challenges that mental health surrounds, but just wondered whether there were any words at all that you might want to share before we wrap up, because I'm conscious a lot of people are dashing off to 4 o'clock meetings. But thank you, Vijaya, for that.
Yeah, no, I think Vijaya, I've seen her question, and I think the point that she makes is very, very valid. And in fact, Vijaya, I'm doing a session into India next week. So if you send me an email, I'll tell you, I can give you the details of the session that I'm doing in India next week.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Geoff. You've been phenomenal. I mean, as ever, every time I hear your story, I get a little lump in my throat, and I think actually use the word resonate an awful lot, and it does encourage everyone to share. Makes me want to say I suffer with mental health and have well-being issues. I take antidepressants, and it's something that I now talk about more freely, because it doesn't make me completely, well, mostly crazy human being. I know you are as well, Geoff, also a crazy human being, but we're all crazy humans, aren't we, at the end of the day? And so being brave to share it, and sharing those stories absolutely has that ripple effect. So every time I hear it, it makes me want to share, makes other people want to share. Had some really, really nice, again here from Dan, Rachel. Thank you, Geoff, and Layla for excellent session. The insights on telling stories in the right environment, the right audience, being the most impactful was excellent. Thanks so much, Rachel. Suresh Iyer, thank you so much. She says an insightful talk. Thanks so much, Suresh. Really loved it. Amazing. Others saying thank you. They're going to be sharing their own personal stories internally. That's great. If you want any help on that, obviously, let us know. But fantastic that you're feeling more confident about sharing your personal stories. Dan says, amazing session. We'll never know who will inspire to speak up when we find the courage to speak up ourselves. Virtual round of applause here. So thank you very much. I'll be giving you a round of applause, Geoff. Thank you, as ever. And if you are tuning in, you're listening today, and this is on demand, and you've got any questions which weren't answered today, feel free to write in. The team or I are here. You can chat to us within the community. Geoff is within the community as well on our network hosted by Mighty Network, so you can join up there. Just go onto our webpage, www.dialglobal.org, and you'll be able to click in. If you need any support, you can find us in the community, so do feel free to share. We've created a safe space to talk about mental health and well-being as well. So if you're not feeling comfortable to speak about within your organization, there's people there. You are not alone. You absolutely are not alone. We'll look forward to seeing you again next week. And Geoff, thanks again as ever, and I'll look forward to catching up very soon.